The clatter of ceramic on formica was the soundtrack to Imani Carter's life, punctuated by the sizzle of the grill and the low hum of conversations at the daily grind diner. She navigated the narrow aisles with an unconscious grace, balancing plates laden with greasy breakfasts and lukewarm coffee. At 26, Imani possessed a quiet dignity that often went unnoticed, a sharp mind that absorbed every detail, and a wariness that settled deep in her bones. Each day was a careful calculation of tips versus bills, a tightrope walk of survival in a city that rarely offered a safety net. The microaggressions were a given: the impatient sighs, the overly familiar tones, the occasional outright rudeness, but she met them with a practiced, professional calm, her observational skills her only shield and sometimes her silent comfort. An unexpected opportunity had come through Mrs. Henderson, a regular at the diner who also did occasional event staffing. "It's a bit last minute, Imani," she'd said, her voice conspiratorial, "but the pay's excellent. Catering for a private party at Arthur Harrington's place. You know, the Millionaire up on Oak Haven Drive." Imani knew of the Harrington estate, a local legend whispered about in hushed, envious tones. It was a world away from her cramped studio apartment. The extra money would be a godsend, easing the pressure of her overdue utilities. The Harrington mansion was less a house and more a sprawling monument to wealth, set back from the road behind imposing iron gates and a meticulously manicured lawn that seemed to stretch for acres. Inside, it was a dizzying display of polished marble, antique furniture, and art that probably cost more than Imani would earn in a lifetime. She moved through the opulent rooms, a tray of delicate canapes in hand, feeling like an intruder in a foreign land. The guests were a blur of expensive fabrics and practiced smiles. During a lull, sent to retrieve more champagne flutes from a little used service pantry, Imani took a wrong turn down a quiet, wood-paneled hallway. It seemed more private than the grand reception rooms. One door was slightly ajar, a soft lamplight spilling out. Curiosity, a rare indulgence, tugged at her. She peeked inside. It was a study, walls lined with leather-bound books, a massive mahogany desk at its center. And there, on a side table, nestled amongst silver, framed accolades, and what looked like patent certificates, was a photograph. Her breath hitched. Her heart hammered against her ribs. It was a photograph of a little girl with bright, curious eyes and two neat braids, beaming, her small hand tucked into the larger one of a smiling young woman, her mother. Beside them stood a man with kind eyes and a proud, gentle smile, her father. And next to her father, his arms slung casually around his shoulder, was a younger, more vibrant version of the man whose house this was, Arthur Harrington. Imani swayed, her hand flying to her mouth. Memories, fragmented and hazy like old, sun-bleached film, flickered at the edges of her mind: a sunny garden, laughter, the scent of her father's pipe tobacco. A deep, rumbling chuckle she now vaguely associated with the older man in the photo. It was her. That little girl was undeniably her. But how? Why was her childhood, a past she believed was simple and marked only by eventual hardship after her parents' early deaths, framed in the private study of one of the city's wealthiest men? "Can I help you?" Imani jumped, whirling around. An older woman in a neat, dark dress stood in the doorway. Her expression was stern, but her eyes, when they focused on Imani, softened with a flicker of something unreadable: surprise, then a dawning, cautious recognition. I'm sorry," Imani stammered, gesturing vaguely at the photo. I was looking for the pantry. I think I saw this photo. The woman stepped further into the room, her gaze falling on the picture, then back to Imani's face, lingering. You were one of the caterers, weren't you? She asked, her voice quiet, yet carrying an odd weight. She didn't address the photo directly. The service area is back towards the main hall. She paused, then added, almost as an afterthought, some memories are best left undisturbed. It's a grand house, easy to get lost in more ways than one. With a gentle but firm gesture, the housekeeper, for that's who Imani assumed she was, ushered her out of the study, leaving Imani with a whirlwind of questions and the indelible, shocking image of her own forgotten past, displayed like a precious memento. The image of the photograph of her younger self so carefree beside her parents and Arthur Harrington became an obsession. Sleep offered little respite, her dreams filled with disjointed images and a profound sense of unease. Back at the daily grind, the clatter of plates and the demands of customers seemed distant, filtered through a new layer of preoccupation. Her normally sharp focus was blurred by the insistent question, what was her connection to Arthur Harrington? Imani's first attempts at research were frustrating. Online searches for Arthur Harrington yielded boilerplate biographies of a reclusive philanthropist and innovator, founder of Harrington Innovations. There were articles about his contributions to technology and local charities, but nothing personal, nothing that mentioned a David or Sarah Carter. Her parents' names, when searched in conjunction with his, drew a blank. It was as if that moment in the photograph, so vivid in its implications, had never existed beyond that silver frame. A few days later, needing to return a misplaced serving dish from the catering event, convenient excuse she'd engineered, Imani found herself back at the imposing gates of the Harrington estate. This time, she was met not by the event staff, but by a different kind of gatekeeper. As she explained her purpose to the security guard, a sleek black car purred to a stop. A man in an impeccably tailored suit emerged, exuding an air of unshakable confidence and subtle disdain. This was Marcus Thorne, CEO of Harrington Investments, a name she'd seen mentioned as Mr. Harrington's right-hand man and the public face of the company. Can I help you? Thorne's voice was smooth, but his eyes were like chips of ice, appraising her quickly and dismissing her in the same breath. Imani, feeling small and flustered under his gaze, explained about the dish and then, gathering her courage, mentioned the photograph. I happened to see a photograph in one of the rooms. She began, a personal one. I believe my family was in it, from many years ago. I was just wondering. Thorne's eyebrow arched almost imperceptibly. A photograph. In Mr. Harrington's private study, I presume. His tone was laced with skepticism. Many people pass through this house for events. Mr. Harrington is a collector of many things. It's highly unlikely a staff member would be featured in a personal photo. Perhaps you're mistaken. He made a dismissive gesture. Leave the dish with security. I'll ensure it's returned. He didn't invite her further, didn't offer any opening for more questions. The message was clear: she was insignificant, her inquiry an overreach. Dejected, Imani turned to leave, but as she did, she saw the housekeeper from the party, Mrs. Vance, tending to some roses near the main entrance. Their eyes met. Mrs. Vance offered a small, almost imperceptible nod, then discreetly gestured towards a small bench partially hidden by a large azalea bush near the service gate. Puzzled but hopeful, Imani waited. A few minutes later, Mrs. Vance appeared, looking over her shoulder before approaching. "Miss Carter, isn't it?" she asked softly. Imani nodded, surprised the housekeeper remembered her name, or perhaps knew it now. "What Mr. Thorne doesn't appreciate," Mrs. Vance said, her voice low and hurried, "is that Mr. Harrington has a very long memory, even if his health isn't what it once was." She pressed a folded piece of paper into Imani's hand. It was yellowed with age, a small, almost brittle news clipping. "Your father, David Carter. He was a good man. A brilliant one. This might help you understand a little." Her eyes held a mixture of sympathy and caution. "Be careful, my dear. Some doors are closed for a reason." Before Imani could ask more, Mrs. Vance gave a small, anxious smile and hurried back towards the house. Imani unfolded the clipping. The headline was small, unremarkable. "Harrington Innovations announces project setback." The article, dated over 2 decades ago, mentioned her father, David Carter, as a lead engineer on a promising but ultimately unviable energy project. It spoke of significant financial losses and a restructuring within the company. It hinted at mismanagement, though no names were explicitly blamed for the failure beyond the project lead. It was a dead end, a confirmation of failure, but it was also the first concrete link between her father and Harrington Innovations. A disgrace, Mrs. Vance had called it. What Thorne didn't realize, as he smoothly managed the Harrington empire, was that Mrs. Vance, loyal to Arthur Harrington for over 40 years, had indeed mentioned the young waitress who had been so struck by the photograph in the study. She had described Imani's resemblance to Sarah, David Carter's wife, and the profound shock on the young woman's face. And Mr. Harrington, frail but still sharp, had listened intently, a flicker of an old, deep sorrow in his eyes, before falling into a thoughtful silence. The old news clipping, though sparse in detail, was a key. It unlocked a name, a place, a time. Imani's eidetic memory, a skill she'd often dismissed as just being good with details, now sprang to life. Holding the clipping, focusing on her father's name, David Carter, lead engineer, she started to recall slivers of conversations, fragments of images from her early childhood. Her father, often smelling of graphite and machine oil, working late into the night at a large desk in their small home, muttering about the Alpha Project and Uncle Arthur's belief in it. She remembered a sense of excitement. Her mother's hopeful smiles, talk of a breakthrough that would change everything. Imani spent her evenings at the public library, then her late nights online, diving into archived newspapers and obscure tech journals from 2 decades past. She found more mentions of David Carter, initially lauded as a rising star in engineering, a visionary. He was not just an associate, as the first clipping implied, but a pivotal figure at Harrington Innovations. Then, silence. After the announcement of the project setback, his name vanished from the company's public records. The narrative was always the same: a brilliant project, a catastrophic failure, massive financial losses. Some articles, more sensationalist, hinted at corporate espionage or gross negligence on his part. It was a carefully constructed story of disgrace. The more she uncovered, the more a cold dread settled in Imani's stomach. This wasn't just a failed project. This was the destruction of her father's reputation, his career. And it was this disgrace that had plunged her family into the hardship she vaguely remembered before her parents' 2 early deaths she now suspected were hastened by stress and heartbreak. Her persistence did not go unnoticed. Imani, in a moment of desperate courage, had penned a carefully worded letter to Mr. Harrington, referencing the photograph and the old news clipping, and sent it via registered mail to the mansion. She received no direct reply. Instead, strange things started happening. Her manager at the daily grind, usually a gruff but fair man, called her into his office. "Imani," he said, looking uncomfortable. "I had a call. Someone from Harrington Investments, just asking some questions about you. Your reliability. Nothing specific, but—" He trailed off, but the implication was clear. Pressure was being applied. Marcus Thorne was making his presence felt. What Imani didn't know was that Thorne had intercepted her letter. He saw her not as a curious waitress, but as a potential threat, a loose end from a past he and his father had worked hard to bury. He was actively trying to discredit her, to paint her as unstable, a grifter looking for a handout from an ailing old man. He made subtle inquiries, spread quiet doubts, ensuring that if she did make any noise, she wouldn't be believed. But behind the scenes, a different plan was indeed unfolding. Mrs. Vance had dutifully informed Mr. Harrington about Imani's letter, expressing her own concerns about Marcus Thorne's increasingly protective and isolating behavior around the old man. Mr. Harrington, though physically weakened, was nobody's fool. He had seen the photograph, heard Mrs. Vance's account of Imani's shock, and now, with the letter, he understood. David Carter's daughter had found her way back. He felt a surge of old guilt and a renewed sense of purpose. Thorne was becoming too powerful, too controlling. Ignoring Thorne's attempts to manage his correspondence and visitors, Mr. Harrington gave quiet instructions to his personal legal team, a firm separate from the corporate lawyers Thorne favored. He asked them to discreetly investigate Imani Carter to verify her identity beyond doubt. And, more importantly, he instructed Mrs. Vance to arrange a meeting, a coincidental encounter away from Thorne's watchful eyes. The truth, he knew, had been buried for far too long. A few days later, Imani received an unexpected call. It wasn't from Mr. Harrington's office, nor from anyone she recognized. It was Mrs. Vance, her voice warm but tinged with an urgency that made Imani's heart beat faster. "Miss Carter," she said, "Miss Setter, Harrington often takes the air in the private rose garden around 3 in the afternoon, if his health permits. He wondered if you might be available to discuss some old varieties of roses he believes your mother was fond of. Today, perhaps, a discussion about roses." Imani knew it was a pretext. This was the meeting. Gratitude and trepidation warred within her. The rose garden was a secluded sanctuary within the vast grounds of the estate, a riot of color and fragrance. Mr. Arthur Harrington was seated on a stone bench, a tartan blanket over his knees despite the mild afternoon. He looked older, more fragile than in the photographs, but his eyes, when they met Imani's, were piercingly clear and held a profound, weary sadness. Mrs. Vance gave Imani an encouraging smile and discreetly withdrew. "Miss Imani Carter," Mr. Harrington said, his voice a soft rasp, but firm. "Thank you for coming. Please sit." He gestured to the bench beside him. Imani sat, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. "Mr. Harrington," she began. "The photograph." "Yes, the photograph," he interrupted gently. "Your father, David, was more than a colleague, Imani. He was my dearest friend, my brother in spirit. And your mother, Sarah, was a light to us all." His gaze drifted to a particularly vibrant yellow rose. Your mother loved those. Sunshine incarnate, she called them. A lump formed in Imani's throat. The casual, fond mention of her parents by this near stranger who was yet so deeply entwined with her earliest memories was overwhelming. Your father, Mr. Harrington continued, his voice heavy with regret, was a genius. We were on the cusp of something revolutionary. An energy source that would have changed the world, made it cleaner, better. David was the heart of it. His designs, his vision. He paused, gathering his strength. We had another partner then, Alastair Thorne. Imani's eyes widened. Thorne, Marcus Thorne's father. Alastair was ambitious, ruthless. Mr. Harrington said, his voice hardening. He saw the potential not for good, but for immense profit, for control. When David refused to cut corners, to compromise on safety and ethical distribution, Alastair acted. He sabotaged the final prototype, made it look like a catastrophic failure due to David's miscalculations. He falsified data, bribed a junior engineer to corroborate the story. He framed your father, Imani. The words struck Imani with physical force. Her father, the kind, brilliant man from her fragmented memories, hadn't failed. He'd been betrayed. Alastair then used David's core research, slightly modified, to build the very foundations of what Harrington Investments, and Thorne Industries before it, became successful on. He reaped the rewards of your father's stolen genius. I was devastated by David's public ruin. He became a broken man. And I was battling my own demons then, a serious illness that took me out of commission for a long time. By the time I recovered enough to try and fight back, Alastair was too entrenched, his narrative too solid. He passed his deceit and his ill-gotten gains to his son Marcus. Mr. Harrington reached into a leather satchel beside him and pulled out a series of worn, leather-bound journals. These were your father's, he said, his hand trembling slightly as he passed them to Imani. His original notes, his designs, his meticulous records. I've kept them safe all these years. They prove everything. They show his brilliance, and they contain the seeds of Alastair's treachery, if one knows where to look. Imani opened the top journal. Her father's familiar, neat handwriting filled the pages, interspersed with complex diagrams and equations. It felt like holding a piece of his soul. Marcus knows some of it, Mr. Harrington said grimly. His father likely confessed on his deathbed, or Marcus is smart enough to have pieced it together. He certainly knows the company's prime patents are built on a contested foundation. That's why he's been so desperate to keep you away, to keep me isolated. He fears the truth. He fears you. Just then, Mrs. Vance hurried back into the garden, her face pale. Sir, Mr. Thorne is on his way here. He found out about Miss Carter's visit. Mr. Harrington straightened, a spark of defiance in his old eyes. Let him come, he said. It's time this ended. He looked at Imani. Your father's legacy, his name, his honor, it's all in these journals, Imani, and in you. Imani clutched the journals to her chest. The shock was immense, but beneath it, a new, fierce resolve was taking root. The fight was no longer just about a photograph. It was about justice for her father. What Mr. Harrington didn't fully realize was the extent of Imani's eidetic memory. She had already begun to see connections, patterns within the few pages. She'd glimpsed that resonated with the hushed, technical jargon she'd overheard her father discussing as a child. The fight wasn't just Mr. Harrington's. It was now hers. Marcus Thorne strode into the rose garden like a conquering general, his face a mask of cold fury. Two stern-faced corporate lawyers flanked him. "Mr. Harrington," Thorne began, his voice dripping with false concern, "I must insist. You're clearly not well. This young woman is taking advantage of your condition." He shot Imani a look of pure venom. "Security will escort Miss Carter off the premises." "That won't be necessary, Marcus," Mr. Harrington stated, his voice surprisingly strong. "Anani is my guest, and she is David Carter's daughter." Thorne scoffed. "A sentimental story. Carter was a failed engineer who nearly bankrupted this company with his incompetence. This is a desperate attempt to extort money from a vulnerable old man." "My father was not incompetent," Imani said, her voice clear and steady, cutting through Thorne's bluster. She stepped forward, one of her father's journals held open. "He was betrayed." "By your father, Alastair Thorne." "Preposterous allegations," one of Thorne's lawyers interjected. "Eyes it." Imani countered, her eyes locking with Marcus Thorne's. She turned to a specific page in the journal. "My father's Alpha project. The one your father claimed was a catastrophic failure. Its core principle involved a unique energy modulation sequence." She recited a complex series of parameters from memory, parameters she'd seen in the journal that echoed remembered technical phrases from her childhood. "Odd, isn't it? Because Harrington Investments' most profitable, proprietary, clean energy patent, filed 2 years after my father was disgraced patent USX 7774B, utilizes an almost identical modulation sequence. A sequence detailed right here, in my father's handwriting, dated 3 years before your patent." Thorne's composure flickered. "Coincidence? Parallel development? Unlikely," Mr. Harrington said, "especially when combined with David's notes on Project Safeguard, a counter-measure he designed to prevent unstable energy cascading. The very issue Alastair claimed was the fatal flaw in David's work. David documented Alastair's insistence on bypassing Safeguard, supposedly to fast-track the project." He looked directly at Marcus. "Your father didn't just steal David's work. He deliberately engineered its public failure to cover his theft." Imani produced another of her father's journals. "And here," she said, her voice ringing with conviction, "are my father's detailed entries about meetings with Alastair Thorne, including dates and specific points of contention where your father overruled safety protocols and pushed for untested modifications that ultimately led to the public demonstration appearing to fail. My father even noted his suspicions about data tampering." Her eidetic memory had allowed her to cross-reference dates in the journal with the old, disparaging news articles she'd found, painting a clear timeline of deceit. One of Mr. Harrington's own trusted legal advisors, summoned quietly by Mrs. Vance, stepped forward with a tablet. "Mr. Thorne, we also have corroborating evidence, a sworn affidavit from a retired junior engineer who has carried the guilt of his falsified testimony for 20 years. He confirms Alastair Thorne pressured him." The color drained from Marcus Thorne's face. His lawyers exchanged uneasy glances. The meticulously constructed lie that had built his family's fortune and his own career was crumbling before his eyes. He looked from Imani's unwavering gaze to Mr. Harrington's resolute expression and knew he was beaten. His attempts to dismiss Imani or declare Mr. Harrington incompetent were now futile. The aftermath was swift and decisive. Marcus Thorne was forced to resign as CEO, his reputation in tatters. An internal investigation, spearheaded by Mr. Harrington and overseen by independent auditors, revealed the full extent of Alistair Thorne's fraud and Marcus's complicity in perpetuating the cover-up. David Carter's name was publicly cleared, his genius posthumously celebrated. Mr. Harrington established the David Carter Innovation Foundation, dedicated to supporting young, ethical engineers and scientists, with a significant portion of the company's profits redirected to fund it. Imani, no longer just a waitress struggling to make ends meet, was offered a leading role on the foundation's board. Her integrity, her sharp intellect, and her profound connection to her father's legacy made her the perfect choice. She accepted, not for the wealth or status, but for the opportunity to honor her father and ensure that other brilliant minds wouldn't suffer the same injustice. The daily grind became a distant memory, replaced by a life of purpose, working alongside Mr. Harrington to right old wrongs and build a brighter future. The framed photograph in the study remained, no longer a ghostly echo of a forgotten past, but a proud testament to enduring friendship and a truth finally brought to light. And so, Imani Carter's journey from a marginalized waitress, overlooked and struggling, to a woman of influence spearheading a legacy of innovation and justice, serves as a powerful reminder that truth has a way of surfacing, and that unrecognized potential, when given a chance, can change the world. Integrity, resilience, and the courage to seek the truth can indeed turn adversity into profound triumph. If this story of resilience and the fight for justice stirred something in you, please share your thoughts in the comments below. Give this video a thumbs up, and don't forget to subscribe for more inspiring narratives about people who turned adversity into triumph. What was the most impactful moment for you?